The river that steals memories, a mystery that no one can explain. The river never stops flowing, even when everything around it dries up and falls silent. It crosses ancient maps, forgotten cities, and nights without witnesses. This story begins when someone realized that the flow didn't follow gravity, but a will of its own, and that getting too close made the water murmur memories that didn't belong to the listener. The most disturbing thing is not that the river never stops, but that it carries something invisible away with each passage. People have returned from the bank changed, with gaps in their memory and marks they couldn't explain. Official records ignore the river's true course, and measurements show that its volume doesn't correspond to its origin. There's a hidden detail, an erased event, that suggests the river flows not only through the land, but through people. When the truth emerges, it will become clear that the river doesn't flow to the sea. It flows to remember. The case of the river began to attract attention when isolated reports started to coincide in different regions, all describing a watercourse that never ceased, even during periods of absolute drought. Official maps showed inconsistent variations, while old records indicated a different course each decade. Residents claimed that the sound of the river never changed, day or night, always constant, like continuous breathing. Initially, authorities treated the phenomenon as a measurement error or local exaggeration. However, when satellite images began to show inexplicable cuts exactly over the course of the river, it became impossible to ignore that it was not just an unusual body of water, but something that seemed to exist outside the rules of nature. The river flowed through areas where the landscape seemed perpetually weary. The nearby vegetation was darker, leaning towards the water, as if it depended on it for something more than survival. The surrounding air was always humid and cold, even under intense sun, and the smell was reminiscent of old metal. At night, insects fell silent, and the sound of the flow became deeper, more profound, almost pulsating. There was no foam or visible variations, only a continuous and hypnotic movement. Those who remained there for a long time reported slight disorientation, as if the surrounding space were stretching out. The environment did not convey immediate danger, but the unsettling feeling that the river was not part of that place, but rather flowing through something that should not be touched. The first warning sign emerged when residents noticed that the river level remained the same after days of heavy rain, and also during long weeks of drought. There were no floods or receding waters. One fisherman claimed to have followed the current for hours without reaching a visible source. Another reported that the water seemed to accelerate when observed. Small incidents began to accumulate. Compasses malfunctioning, audio recordings capturing only the sound of the flow even far from the bank. When a sensor installed to measure flow registered impossible values and then shut down on its own, the idea of a simple anomaly lost its force. The river was not reacting to the environment. The environment was reacting to it, as if something were being kept in constant motion by a need that no one could identify. The most consistent witness was a man who had lived near the river for decades and said he had never heard silence coming from the water. He described the flow as something conscious, capable of adjusting its sound according to who approached. According to his account, upon touching the surface he felt a memory emerge without origin, a moment from his childhood that did not belong to him. The man stated that the river seemed to recognize people, altering its speed at certain points. After one of these encounters, he began to wake up at the same time every day, synchronized with the rhythm of the current. His accounts were ignored until other people began to describe identical experiences, using the same words as if they had heard the story before even telling it. The initial investigation began with simple measurements taken by technical teams, seeking a plausible hydrological explanation. Sensors were positioned along the river's course, drones mapped the route, and water samples were collected. The results never matched. Flow readings varied without cause, coordinates changed, and images showed blurred sections. One report mentioned the absence of an identifiable source, but it was filed away without conclusion. As the days passed, team members reported intense fatigue and difficulty remembering details of their recent work, as if the investigation itself was being slowly erased by the river's constant movement. Always, The object was found trapped between rocks at the narrowest point of the river, revealed only when the water receded for a few seconds, something no one had ever seen happen before. It had an elongated shape, a smooth, dark surface, and was cold even under strong sunlight. It did not appear corroded despite its apparent age. When touched, the sound of the river changed rhythm, becoming slower and heavier. Whoever held it felt a pressure in their chest and the sensation of losing something they couldn't name. Photographs of the object were blurry, and measurements failed. The general impression was that the object was not there by chance, but functioning as a control point, something that kept the flow in constant motion. When it was removed, the river never stopped but seemed to observe. If this interpretation is making you rethink this story, leave a comment below with your perspective. These videos are meant to provoke reflection, and I read all the comments. And if this type of content interests you, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next ones. After the object was removed, something subtly yet unsettlingly changed. The river continued to flow, but the constant sound disappeared in certain stretches, creating pockets of absolute silence. In these areas, the environment seemed suspended, without wind or perceptible movement. People crossing these points reported immediate lapses, forgetting why they were there. Animals avoided the riverbank, and electronic equipment shut down without warning. The silence did not indicate an absence of activity, but concentration, as if the river were recalibrating something internal. At night, residents claimed to hear the flow only inside their own heads, even far from the water. It became clear that the sound no longer came from the river to the environment, but from the environment to within the people, transforming the silence into a new kind of invisible current. The turning point came when forgotten records surfaced, revealing that the river had been interrupted before, but never in the same way. Ancient accounts described periods when the flow seemed to slow only for certain people. By cross-referencing dates and names, it became clear that the river reacted to specific individuals, not to the environment. The removed object didn't keep the river moving, but it limited its influence. Without it, the flow began to traverse something beyond the water, affecting thoughts, dreams, and decisions. The river never flowed only through its physical bed. It always flowed through human memories, using constant movement to prevent certain memories from taking hold, erasing them before they could become permanent. Collective fear spread when it became impossible to deny the river's effects. People began to forget recent events, entire conversations, familiar faces. The panic didn't stem from a sudden event, but from the slow erosion of identity. Community gatherings ended in silence, with everyone mentally hearing the same invisible flow. Some tried to distance themselves from the river, but reported feeling the current inside their heads, continuous, impossible to stop. Children woke up at night describing identical dreams, always following the water to a point they couldn't cross. The fear ceased to be individual and became collective when everyone realized they weren't losing different memories, but complementary parts of the same story, fragments of something the river insisted on keeping in motion so it could never be fully remembered. The forbidden theory arose when someone dared to suggest that the river didn't exist to transport water, but to keep something in continuous motion. The current would serve to prevent specific memories from becoming fixed, dissolving them before they could organize themselves. The constant flow wasn't physical but cognitive. The river carried people across to prevent certain memories from becoming permanent. The object found would act as a regulator, limiting the amount of memory erased. Without it, the river expanded its reach. The most disturbing idea was that the river didn't remove random memories, but those that could reveal their true origin. If someone managed to remember for long enough, the flow would cease. That's why it never stops. The search for control of the river ended without announcement or public explanation. The teams were withdrawn, sensors abandoned, and any official mention of the phenomenon disappeared from recent reports. The river continued to flow, indifferent, while the residents learned to live with small gaps in their memory, accepting these omissions as normal. The main witness left the region without saying goodbye, and no one remembered exactly when this happened. The object was never returned to the riverbed, and its location became uncertain. The general feeling was not one of resolution, but of forced interruption, as if persisting meant drawing the river's attention again. The search did not end because answers were found, but because everyone understood at the same time that continuing would mean losing more than they were willing to forget. The revelation emerged in fragments, piecing together memories that had seemed disconnected until then. The river never needed a source, because it didn't begin in physical space. It originated in collective forgetfulness, fueled by everything that needed to keep moving in order not to be understood. The lost memories didn't disappear. They were merely carried along, diluted in the constant flow. Some people began to remember for moments, feeling the river slow down within their own minds. In those moments, the sound diminished, almost ceasing, as if the flow depended on the absence of comprehension. The final revelation was simple and terrifying. The river only continues to flow because no one can remember everything at once. If that happened, it would cease to exist. The river continued flowing, indifferent while time carried away memories and fragments of lives. Those who remained close learned to live with gaps in their memories, accepting absences as part of everyday life. Each generation grew up hearing its whisper, without ever understanding its origin. The object disappeared, but the invisible current remained. The river not only existed, it shaped what was remembered and what was lost, leaving as a legacy a story that could never be fully told, only felt. If you enjoyed this approach and want to continue exploring stories that are almost never told this way, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And now, click on the video that's appearing on the screen. It directly complements what you just watched and may completely change the way you see this story.